What challenge?
Now, because most of you have chosen to acknowledge my no talking, we will do that today. There will be absolutely no talking. Now listen to me very carefully on that. It's always a good thing. There is no, when I say there's no talking, there's no gray area. The only possible reason you can have for talking from this point forward in this class is if somebody's life was in danger, there was a fire or something like that. Otherwise, the only way you're allowed to talk is if I acknowledge your hand being raised and I say you have a question, or you come back to me and say something. You are not allowed to look at somebody and move your mouth, because I will call that communicating, any of that sort of thing. So it's just a bad idea. If it even looks to me like you're talking, then, because talking is a privilege, in which some of you have chosen to ignore it for a little bit. So if you have a question, usually I wait till I'm done with this lesson and then we can answer any questions, because unless it's dealing specifically with you don't have a pencil or something, most things. Fortunately, this usually only happens once in a while. You guys will learn your valuable lesson and we'll all move on. Right, Jacob? No, you're Jacob. I can tell you something. All right, so here we go. First things first. Here's where this is my preaching to you. Lesson 15 involved, it says making a multiplication table. Making a multiplication table. Now, I will tell you, those of you, and I've seen some of you already, some of you are quite reliant, I should say, upon looking at, I know your assignment book has a multiplication tables in it. I will tell you this, you are doing yourself probably the worst thing possible if you have to look at a multiplication table. I know Mrs. Luce focused very much on you learning your multiplication facts, and I would say that is the best thing in the world you could ever do for you mathematically. I've got a couple 7th graders that don't know the multiplication tables. And if you don't know your multiplication tables by the time you're in 7th grade, you are going to really struggle. And for you to have to, when you get to the big multiplication problem, God bless you, you don't have to, by the way, God bless you again, you don't have to write this down. Okay, but if you have a big, we haven't done this, but take a look at this. If you have a triple digit multiplication problem, and I've said this before, there's at least 9 multiplication problems in that. And if you have to, number one, think about what 8 times 5 is. Number two, look at a thing. You are just going to get yourself really mixed up when you start doing all this stuff. I mean, you should know that 8 times 5 is 40. Then 5 times 6 is 30, plus 4 is 34. 35 plus 3 is 38. Put your 0 down there. 24, 2, 18, 20, 2, 21, 23. 2 zeros down there, 40 again. You got the same thing we had up there, so it'd be 4, 8, 3, and blah, 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 blah. There were all those multiplication problems. If you have to think about what 8 times 5 is and you're confused whether it's 40 or 45, 80% of the time you are going to get this problem wrong, because you'll think of something wrong, you'll write the wrong number there because your mind you can't think of all those things. So please, if you don't know those multiplication tables, have your parents quiz you on them. Ask me for some practice sheets, because if you get it in 5th grade, you don't have to worry about it. If you don't get it in 5th grade, and it's not about understanding it, it's just about memorizing it. Because you people I know can memorize things, because you memorize words to songs. You can recite all sorts of things, pledges of allegiance. It's all just a matter of taking the time to do it. I thought that was exciting. Don't answer that. All right, so here we go. Your notes for today. Ready, get set. Oh, wait, somebody said something. Who was it? Was it Jordan Shaw? Oh, Jordan. Now I got to stop and take. Let me get my whole list of sheet papers. Now, the nice thing is when you get sentences for talking, Jordan, they don't take you very long, because it's kind of more of a warning. But you don't want to get it twice. Because usually the first sentence is, I just won't talk. Actually, it's more like this. I will give it to you, because it's a standard operating one. It is, when told not to talk, I won't talk. When Problem is, we have to take time to do this. Not my favorite thing, to talk. I will not talk. But some people have a hard time with it. And it's only 5 times, so it'll take you 30 seconds or less. So don't feel bad. But don't do it again, because then they get really crazy. All right, first notes are right here. Write this down. Oh, we've already maybe done this. Now put it under multiplication. Under multiplication. And under that, we just have to talk about a few things. When you do multiplication, number one, it is really like a quick way to do addition. We've already done this, I think, right? Yes. I guess I can't ask you to do it, then you got it right. So, quick way to do addition. In other words, if you had 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 6s. That is 5 times 6, and that's where you get your 30. Okay, but it is also what we call multiples. And when we talk about multiples, we talk about counting by numbers. In other words, multiples of 6 are counting by 6. If I asked you to count by 6, you would go 6, 12, 18, 24, 30. By the way, you could go with multiples forever and ever and ever and ever. I won't have you do that. But multiples are also multiplication problems. What I mean by that is this. This is 6 times 1. This is 6 times 2. This is 6 times 3. 6 times 4, 6 times 5. Okay, so if you know your basic math facts, you also know multiples. If you know your multiples, you know math facts. If you looked at a multiplication table, you would see all that sort of stuff there. And then also under multiplication, so much to do and so little time to do. Just like with addition, we have both the commutative property and the associative property. The commutative and the associative properties, both Colin we did in addition, right? Did we talk about those in addition? If I acknowledge you, you can say yes. You are allowed to speak if I'm not there. Thank you. So you get that now. All right. And remember what the commutative property says is this. The nice thing about multiplication and addition is that if you know one multiplication fact like that, you also know that you can move those numbers around, switch their places, and it is still true. 6 times 5 is the same thing as 5 times 6. They switched places, they moved, everybody's happy, it's still 30 no matter how you do it. That's the commutative. Remember, they move. Commute. We should say it should be called the commutative. The associative property, if you remember that one you had to have parentheses, and I don't remember, I think we did this. 6 times 5 times 2 is the same thing as 6 times 5 times 2. Notice the numbers don't move, but what will move is the parentheses that they put around those numbers. I hope that's where they go for the, did we talk about, you know what? We didn't. Colin, did we talk about the associative property?
Yeah. No.
Okay, good. Well then ignore that for a little while. We'll come back to that. Just leave that there. We're not going to talk about that because I don't think that's kind of something special and maybe we can tell about. Well, we do have the identity property of multiplication. Sorry. Identity property. If you remember the identity property of addition, by the way, this is still under multiplication, not a new page. You can keep it under multiplication. If you remember, under addition, the identity property was what do you do to something to keep it the same? What do you add to something to keep it the same? And in addition, you added what, Trevor?
0.
0. But in multiplication, that's not the case because you're asking yourself, what number do you multiply a number by to get the same thing? In multiplication, the identity property, Victoria says,
1.
is multiplying by 1. The identity property is multiplying by 1. And that should make you happy because of that property, you know a million, billion, zillion math facts. Why? Because you know 0 times 1 is 0, you know 1 times 1 is 1, you know 2 times 1 is 2, and you could go on forever multiplying things by 1. 721,636 times 1 is 721,636. You can go on forever and ever and days with this identity property and say all sorts of math facts. They go on forever. And then one last one we have to talk about is the 0 property of multiplication. And you may or may not be able to guess what the 0 property of multiplication is. Brian, take a shot at it.
Anything times 0 equals 0.
There you go. And that's all you have to write down there is 0 times anything is a big, fat, whopping 0. All these things that you knew, but you didn't know that they were actually called properties in math. But now you know, and you can be very excited about such things. Oh wait, somebody said something. Who was that? Brian. Brian, dear Brian. This, by the way, is a good demonstration of your own self-control. Now, hiccups obviously don't count. Unless there's somebody potentially hiccuping. We don't usually have to institute this no we got a couple more things. Make sure we know what the parts of a multiplication problem are. And I think we may have talked about this before too. If you have, let's say, 7 times 5, which is 35, but I think we talked about this. The two things that you multiply together are called, Tyler, do you remember doing this? 7 and 5, what is the name of those two things? You remember? Did we talk about this? Maybe not. Andrew? The two things that get multiplied together are called? Frankie? No, they're not the multiples. Cole? No, that's when you add two things together. Those things are called. Oh, maybe we haven't done this. Colin?
We have not done this.
Oh, so you're gonna lie. So I'll just give it to you. Those two things are called the factors. Factors are what you get when you multiply. The things that get multiplied. Things that get. So you learned something today. Instead, imagine how much you learned when you quiet. And then the answer to a multiplication problem, the answer, we don't have that one either. Victoria?
It's a quotient.
That's to a division problem. That's a good try. Maggie, do you know? Trevor?
Product.
It is the product. And that's good to know because the book will say something like this. Colors, so I'm really tired of that color. If they ask you what's the product of 4 and 8, since they use the word product there, they're asking you simply what is 4 times 8. And that would be obviously 32. Or they might say, you know, if 6 and 9 are factors, what's the product? And that would be the same thing. 6 times 9 is 54. That's what you write on paper. By the way, I'm guessing many of you did this assignment and they probably asked you those things. So I would almost thought you would have known what they were, but that's what they are there. He believes, he thinks